There are three people on this call who know what they're talking about, and I am not one of them. So if you guys need to, just ask each other your own questions, go off on tangents, and I don't speak again for the rest of the entire thing, I'm perfectly happy with that. But nevertheless, we need the first pork chop to get us going. So I'm going to throw into the pit. Is the left's destructive tendencies, is it a glitch? Or is it a feature? Whoever wants to grab that chop and take the first bite, please do so now.
Do you want me to summarise to your viewers what the actual model is, and then we can. So the basic idea is that I'll try and be as quick as I can. But we were under half Darwinian selection until the Industrial Revolution, about 1800. There was 50% child mortality, or a bit less than that. And the population was being purged every generation of deleterious mental and physical mutations. And what we were selecting for, it seems, was not just intelligence, but also certain psychological traits to be, for example, group oriented, because then the more group oriented group wins the battle of sort of group selection, to be pro-social as individuals, to be conservative, and to be religious. And all of these factors have a significant heritability, and they are all kind of co-correlated into, or pleiotropically related into a kind of fitness factor. And so this means that's what we were at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. We were people that were conservative, which in terms of these moral foundations we all have means that you're high in the group-oriented foundations of in-group loyalty, of obedience to authority, and of purity, and also you're reasonably high in the individually oriented foundations of equality and harm avoidance. The left, by the way, tend to be only concerned about the individually oriented foundations. With the collapse of child mortality from about 40% down to 1%, of course, you get a huge buildup in mutation. This is going to be probably, although there's going to be exceptions to this, in the direction of being anti-conservative, of being anti-group oriented, of being leftist, of being irreligious. All of these traits are associated with poor genetic health. So essentially, we are becoming genetically sicker and sicker and sicker, and thus, to some extent, there's all kinds of nuances we can get into, but more left-wing. If this goes on forever, we become so deracinated, we're all so sick, we're all so utterly sick that we just die out. When the next Graham Hancock meteorite hits and wipes out civilization, everybody that's on the grid is knocked out, and we're remembered as gods by the people on the Andaman Islands. Everyone's destroyed. So what would be good is if something hit in to stop that, something hit in to reverse that. That would be very useful. And what we suggest in the book Woke Eugenics is wokeness, because what eventually a tipping point is reached. Wokeness then takes over the culture, and it starts pushing us in a maladaptive direction. It tells us to do maladaptive things, which means that you won't pass on your genes. So it tells us to, be like the opposite sex. It encourages women to be infertile. It encourages people to be fat. It encourages people to have abortions, which tend to be taken up by those that are psychopathic, basically individualistic. It encourages euthanasia. It encourages the collapse of civilization, so nothing works. If you're ill, you can't get cured of things. It encourages transsexuality. I could go on. And the people that won't be sucked into that death cult will be those that are genetically resistant to it, i.e. those that are conservative, those that are religious, those that are of the kind, to some extent, that would be there before the Industrial Revolution. I mean, I've simplified as much as I can, but therefore those people are resistant to it. Everybody else dies out, and we go back to being genetically healthy once again. And thus, as a subgroup, we can survive. And so then we carry on. That's pretty much it.
So I'm keen to hear Danny's response to this, but I do have one short question to interject, which is, if wokeness is a form of mutational load, why is it most prevalent amongst the elites? Because you by definition you should expect the elites to be the most fitted and adapted to any system.
Because intelligence is a marker of low mutational load, but it's only a weak one. So there are other dimensions to intelligence, and one of those is social conformity, and that you look around the world and you notice the way things are, and you force yourself by ethical control to conform to it. and then you competitively signal your conformity to it to attain social status. And so this is, I think, why there is this weird contradiction whereby intelligence is part of this fitness factor, and intelligence is associated with health at the genetic level. The genes that are associated with intelligence are associated with health, genetic health, heart, like low heart disease, things like that. But they're also associated with conformity. It makes you conformist. And this helps you to be in the elite. But maybe Ollie would like to add some nuance to what I've said.
No, I would just say, yes, wokeness is sort of mutational load characterized by higher intelligence and often somewhat psychopathic Machiavellian dark triad personality, which is why it's different from just your ordinary, sickly, possibly quite stupid person you see who's not really capable of engaging in high-level politics and manipulation of, society and so forth.
I see. Could we bring in Dr. Danny to get a framing of this?
So I think we have a lot of points of agreement here. So I think we both agree. So with respect to the original question, is this a glitch or is it a feature? I think we all agree that this is actually a feature. This is not what we're seeing happening here is happening because of some sort of mechanism that has been selected for. It is not some mistake. It's not a glitch. So I think we agree on that. I think we agree about the collapse of child mortality being key. And I think we agree with the notion that woke is effectively a sort of purging function. I haven't described it like that. That is consistent with what I have described. So I think we actually have a lot of points in common here where we agree. Where we disagree, I think, is on the mechanism, the specific selection pressures that are arising and what's actually happening here and why. So we've got a lot of points of agreement. So I hope it's not sort of too nuanced a discussion about the disagreements. I guess the first thing I think that I probably would disagree with, we have down. So there was a lot less selection pressure as a result of child mortality, but what it was replaced with almost immediately is tremendous selection pressure from differential reproduction. So we went from having a lot of people whose kids were dying and thereby their genes were not getting passed on. When that went down, when child mortality went down, one of the first things that went down very shortly after it was child birth rate. And what that meant is that not only did the average birth rate go down, but the absolute number of individuals who are not having any children at all went up. So what we saw was a shift in the source of selection pressure. It's not that we say no selection pressure is when everybody in the population is reproducing with approximately equal frequency. The sort of level of different levels of different genes is staying around about the same. Everybody's reproducing the same. Now, that's what you sort of call weak selection pressure, right? Everything just sort of stays the same, and in absent sort of genetic drift, you don't get much happening. However, when you've got really differential reproduction, then you still have a lot of individuals whose genes are not getting passed on to the next generation. And of course, what we're seeing now, if we fast forward a few more decades to now, we're reaching a point, I think, someone will correct me for not being quite right, but is it half of women who they estimate in a not very long period of time will have reached their sort of the end of their reproductive window without actually reproducing. So we're certainly still seeing tremendous selection pressure, but the source of that selection pressure is now different. It is no longer primarily, or maybe it was never primarily, child mortality, but it has been reduced in the form of child mortality, and it has been increased in the form of differential reproduction. So we still have a lot of selection pressure, and that's kind of key to my theory of what woke effectively is. So I'll try to summarize it as quickly as I can, but a bit like Ed, I feel like it's a challenge to get it out in a short space of time. What I think it is effectively manipulative female reproductive suppression. Once we started having all of these babies surviving, and selection pressure was sort of somewhat relaxed, we see a massive increase in female manipulative reproductive suppression, where you start to see people having fewer and fewer babies. And what we see with woke, exactly as Ed explained, every aspect of woke is reproductively limiting. Every aspect of woke is, at least that I can think of, is anti-natal. There isn't anything that is pro-natal about woke. It's all antenatal. And the reason why, in my view, that it's all antenatal is because it is all a manifestation of manipulative female reproductive suppression, driven by a whole bunch of things. Once you're no longer losing, as a population, once you're no longer losing a whole bunch of children to sort of high levels of childhood mortality, there is perhaps room for these other mechanisms to start playing out without actually being sort of, the population on the whole shooting itself in the foot. Because you now have a lot more potential babies that you can start really suppressing that reproduction. We also know that this decline in birth rate corresponds very closely to an increase in the GDP of a society. So as soon as you've got wealth and something that looks remotely like excess resources, we see birth rates beginning to plummet. And of course, that's because wealth and excess resources are very closely related to this decline in childhood mortality in the first place. So these things are all clustering together. And so my argument is that what's happening on a sort of broad civilizational or societal level is we've got woke as a manifestation of female manipulative reproductive suppression. Women, primarily elite women, which is why, but for your question earlier, why is it primarily amongst the elite? Because it is the elite who get to set the social rules. So it's the elite who are deciding what it is that we are going to be allowed and not allowed to do, especially among women, which of course is why endorsement for woke ideals is also much stronger.
This clip is taken from a free episode of Brokenomics, which you can now view on the Lotus Eaters website. Head over to lotuseaters.com.